Okay, welcome back to the second half of the evening. So just a short introduction to Jnanavaca. As I said, my name is Keshavaraj. I'm chair here at the Cambridge Buddhist Centre. But we're very lucky to have Jnanavaca as our president. So for those of you who don't know, Jnanavaca lives in London, and in a way he's very experienced. He's been a chair of the London Buddhist Centre previously, and it's great to have his support, his interest in us, and often his advice, very good advice. So it's very lovely to have him here. And also I think it's great to have Jnanavaca, particularly to talk about Sangharakshita. Some of us know about Sangharakshita quite a bit. Some of us might not know so much. I said at the beginning that he was the founder of the Triratna Buddhist Order, but he also, actually even before he created the order, he created the Friends, or the community, of which the order is the centre, as it were, or the guide in a way. So Jnanavaca will draw out a bit more and say a bit more about Sangharakshita and his importance and his legacy, I think. But I couldn't think of anyone more ideal to talk about Sangharakshita, because not only does Jnanavaca really know the teachings that he passed. Sometimes we call Sangharakshita Bhante. Bhante just means teacher. So it's a sort of term of reverence, really. So we might intersperse Sangharakshita, which was his ordained name, and Bhante, because that's the name we use. But I couldn't think of anyone more ideal to talk. Not only does Jnanavaca very much know the teachings, he's reflected on the teachings and put them into practice, but Jnanavaca is a disciple. I think I can say that, can't I? Yeah. Sometimes that word, people may be a bit uncomfortable with that word, and it does sometimes have connotations that maybe don't quite fit. But there's a Buddhist kind of disciple, which, well, I know I call myself a disciple as well. I know Jnanavaca exemplifies, I think, what it means to be a Buddhist disciple. He's a disciple of Sangharakshita. And I want to just draw out two qualities, I think, of what I would say is a Buddhist disciple. So one is a reverence, a reverence. What is reverence? Reverence is a receptivity, an openness, an opening of the heart to another person who you feel in some way or other embodies what you admire, what inspires you, what you look up to. So it's a natural movement of the heart. It's an orientation of the heart. And I think it's a very human quality. And in fact, I'd go so far as to say, without some sort of reverence, I think you couldn't really live a spiritual life. There needs to be an openness, a movement of the heart to live a truly human, a truly spiritual life. But within Jnanavaca, I've noticed this, that this kind of natural reverence flows very freely, and I don't know, it's delightful to see your responsiveness to other teachers, and particularly Bhante. So that's something I've noticed that you embody. Now I know that this quality of reverence is not just something that one finds oneself with. It can be cultivated, and I won't say any more about that because I think you're going to say something a little bit about that quality. But as well as reverence, another quality within discipleship, I think, is discernment. There's several aspects of this, but a discernment is a sensitivity to who and what one shows reverence to. It embodies the ability to actually just test what you might have an initial response to someone, but you test what they're saying and what they embody and reflect on their qualities. Not only that, but a Buddhist disciple also takes responsibility for their own actions. They don't say, well, my teacher said do this, I'm just following my teacher. They take responsibility, they check within their own experience and reflect and they take responsibility. So my sense is there are many other qualities, I think, in discipleship, but I think Jnanavaca embodies both the two, and in a way balances and integrates both those two. So I could say more, but I'll leave it there, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Chaitaraja. And yeah, I just want to say thank you to all of you, for being here tonight, but also being here to celebrate Bhante's 100th birthday, his birth anniversary. It's an honour for me to be able to speak on this particular day. None of us is going to be around for the 200th birthday anniversary. I hope that there will be a celebration, maybe even in this very room. I want to start, though, with some words from Bhante himself, from one of his volumes of memoirs. It's the first volume, called The Rainbow Road from Tooting Broadway to Kalimpong, or The Rainbow Road, from Tooting Broadway to Kalimpong. And I wanted to read this passage. It's a bit lengthy, but I wanted to read it for a number of reasons. One is because he starts with his birth, and then he goes on to talk about his earliest memory. And at one level, when you read Bhante, and particularly when you read him talking about himself, at one level he writes in a very beautiful but quite ordinary way, as if spiritual awakenings and mysterious happenings with exotic gurus is commonplace. He writes in a very sort of ordinary way. You have to sometimes read beneath the words to see that he might be pointing to something deeper. That's how I read this particular passage. Apart from my refusal to cry when born, the strangest circumstance of my most recent appearance in this world, on the 26th of August 1925, is that it took place in a nursing home in southwest London, only a few hundred yards from the spot where, 2 years earlier, had died Alan Bennett, otherwise Ananda Maitreya, the first Englishman to take the yellow robe in the East and return to teach the Dharma in his native land. So you could give a whole talk just on that coincidence, which Bhante makes nothing more of that. But the fact that quite early in this memoir, in his first volume, there's this reference to the first English monk, Buddhist monk, who died just a short, well, he says, a few hundred yards from the spot where Bhante was born. Tooting Broadway just seems an unlikely spot to be born in any way, doesn't it? And there he is. He then goes on to talk about the house that he lived in, but I'm going to skip that and say what his earliest memory is, and just see what you make of it. What I take to be my earliest memory, however, finds me not outside, but inside the house. Lying at night in the great double bed in my parents' room, which was at the front of the house, I used to stare up at the foliated ceiling piece, the size and shape of a cartwheel, from the centre of which hung the light. As motors passed up and down the main road, which was at the bottom of our street, their headlights, reflected onto the ceiling, swung slowly round the centrepiece, light, great, bright spokes around a shadowy hub. If the motors were going south towards the coast, the spokes swung clockwise. If north, to the city's heart in the opposite direction. with the clanging of the distant tram bells and the low roar and rumble of the other traffic in my ears, I used to lie in the darkness and watch the spokes turning now this way, now that, and now both ways simultaneously as two motors passed each other until lulled to sleep. In later years, when I slept in my own bedroom, I used to experience the sensation of being whirled round and round into a great golden light which gradually engulfed me until I knew no more. Whether the later experience, which continued until I was 5 or 6, was connected with the earlier, I do not know. But for quite a long time, after it had ceased, I took for granted that everyone fell asleep in the same manner. And they don't, do they? They're not engulfed in the great golden light. When I think of Bhante, as I will refer to him, I think of his extraordinary life. It's really worth reading those memoirs. He in some ways, was a human being like no other, just in terms of the life that he led, with so many different facets. But for me, he's more than just an extraordinary human being who lived an extraordinary human life. He is, of course, my teacher who has shown me the way to the Buddha and to the Dharma and the Sangha. He's revealed those three jewels to me in a way that I can practice. And for that, I feel great reverence and great gratitude. So yes, I do want to touch on this theme of reverence, which Keturaja, thankfully, you already introduced. The first thing I want to say is that you don't have to feel reverence for Bhante. You don't need to. Many of you will never have met him, and now you can't physically at least meet him, although you may meet him in other ways. You may meet him in meditations, you may meet him in dreams, you may meet him somehow in that imaginal world. I know people who have never met him in the flesh, who have had profound meetings with Bhante. I won't go so far as to say you'll not meet him. After all, you can meet him in his writings, in his teachings, in his poetry. But many of you won't meet him in the flesh. I was fortunate enough to have a number of meetings with him, both in groups and one-to-one. My reverence for him was pretty immediate. It was pretty immediate. But as Keturaja said, maybe I've got a sort of temperament, maybe it's part of my Indian conditioning, where reverence for teachers and elders is quite natural for me. It's sort of been part of the culture that I grew up in. And I wouldn't say that it's natural necessarily in our culture today, and I don't think you have to feel it for Bhante. So you can't force yourself to feel it anyway. Reverence isn't something that one can impose on oneself. Yeah? But I would go as far as Keturaja and a bit further to say that reverence is a necessary quality in a human life. So it may not be for Bhante, but what is perhaps more important for each of us is that there is a degree of reverence for someone or some people, or just for the Buddha in our lives. It's not just a human state, emotion, I was going to say. It's not just a human emotion or volition. It's an enlightened one. Bhante pointed out that in the Gaurava Sutta in the Pali Canon, shortly after the Buddha attained enlightenment, he looked around to revere someone. He said to himself that a life without reverence is suffering. And he looked around and couldn't see that there was any human being or any being in the whole cosmos that was more spiritually attained, more spiritually developed than he was. And he decided to revere the Dharma. Not the teaching of the Buddha, which came later, but the Dharma as reality, the Dharma as truth with a capital T. You could say the Dharma as the principle of enlightenment, which is an eternal principle in the fabric of things. He decided to revere that because to live without reverence was painful. So I was listening recently to a talk by Subhuti where he was talking about the need for reverence, and he suggested that we could learn to revere the Buddha. If you can revere the Buddha, or what he was saying is that if you can revere at the highest possible level, a being at the highest possible level, or enlightenment itself, if you can revere at the highest level, then the capacity to revere will also work itself out for lesser beings than the Buddha, at lower levels. Do you see what I mean? It works itself out. You find that reverence comes more naturally if you revere at the highest possible level. If you mix up levels and you revere a human being, even Bhante perhaps, as if they were enlightenment personified, perfect, another Buddha, if you revere them in that way, you might be disappointed. Yeah? And then disappointment can then lead to, well, spiritual disappointment can be very, very painful. It can lead to great turmoil. It can lead to, all sorts of dark states, depression, cynicism even. Cynicism is the sort of polar opposite of reverence. It's so rife in society, cynicism, this refusal to revere anybody as higher than spiritually more developed than oneself, or in any way more developed actually. That sort of cynical attitude is a closing of the heart. It's a deadening of the heart. And then that, I think, will lead, well, it will be an obstacle, quite a severe obstacle on the spiritual journey. Yeah? So somehow we have to get our reverence sort of sorted out. And what Subhuti was suggesting is that you revere the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, maybe the historical Buddha or the archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who personify dimensions of enlightenment. And they're safe to revere them. Yeah? They won't let you down. You open your heart to reverence. You learn to do that. If you can really do that, what will happen if you practice the Dharma, and I'm sure many of you know this and experience this, is that you start to feel reverence for everybody and anything that led you to the Buddha and the Dharma. Yeah? The reverence starts to just spill over. And for me, Bhante, above all people, he's not the only one. I wasn't ordained by Bhante, I was ordained by Subhuti. So Bhante technically is my teacher's teacher. But Bhante, above anybody, has led me to the Buddha and the Dharma. So for me, it's quite easy to revere him. It's very easy, actually. I also feel that if you struggle with reverence in your life, then look to cultivate gratitude. Look to cultivate appreciation for what you have been given by, all the people in your life. Yeah? Potentially all the people in your life. Shortly after my ordination, I was on a solitary retreat, and I decided to just cultivate or cultivate gratitude for different people who had led me to the point where I could be ordained into the Triratna Buddhist Order. And I wrote their names down in gratitude. And I recently came across the list, and there were 297. I should have made it 300, shouldn't I? I should have made it 300. I fell just short of people right from earliest memories of childhood, you know, teachers, friends, family, all the way to work colleagues, some of whom I really didn't like, who made my life really difficult, who I clashed with, had conflicts with, and somehow I knew that I'd learned from those relationships. To friends in the Sangha, etc., etc. So if you can learn to cultivate gratitude, which we can all do, reverence is a very allied quality. It's a close quality. It is, after all, an opening of the heart. Metta, when directed to higher values, as perhaps embodied in people, normally it's said that it leads to Shraddha, and I think reverence is an aspect of Shraddha. It leads to faith. So Bhante for me is an object of reverence. He's a person of reverence for the person he was, for the man he was, for the man who lived the life that he lived, and for the Dharma that he taught and the Sangha that he created. But also in my imaginal world, Bhante has an archetypal place. He's like a mythic figure. When you saw him, when I saw him, he was already an elderly man, and every time I saw him, he seemed to be wearing grey cardigans and grey trousers, and slippers or something, and you know, like a sort of granddad. Well, he wouldn't be my granddad, but do you know what I mean? Like a benevolent, kindly old English gentleman. And I would go to see him at Adhisthana or Majjhima where he used to live, and my instinct would be to prostrate at his feet. And I do that. I didn't do that every time, but I did do it most times I went to see him. And I'm glad I did that, because it was something that I wanted to do, not that he expected. And at the same time, I was sort of comically aware of the incongruous nature of this gentleman in his slippers, in his armchair in grey, and me prostrating to his slippers. And there was a sort of, you know, but I'm glad I did it. After he died, I can remember going to Urgyen House, which is where he spent the last 5 years of his life. And you can still go and visit the flat. It was like a granny flat where he lived, an annex where he lived. And I can remember going into his bedroom, and I don't think you can do this anymore, because they've sort of put a bit of a rope there or something, quite rightly. But I went into his bedroom and I opened the wardrobe, as you do. And yes, there was, on hangers, there was grey after grey, a sort of row of identical grey. And then at the very last, on the last coat hanger, there was this resplendent, bright yellow, like this sort of yellow on the shrine, silk Tibetan shirt, embroidered richly, just hanging there. And just that image of that brocade, that shirt made of Tibetan brocade, yellow, in amongst this grey, summarised something, it captured something of the contradictions, that Bhante wasn't somebody you could just know ever, really. He was a vast man with a huge, vast life. He was both that tantric guru wearing that yellow brocade shirt, and he also was that benevolent, kindly English gentleman with a razor-sharp mind and a wit that was both delightful and slightly scary to be on the receiving end of. He used to tease me sometimes, and it was both delightful and slightly scary. I won't tell more stories. Well, no, I will, actually. I'll come back to more stories. But yes, I just wanted to say, look, you can still get to know Bhante. You can get to know him through, as I said, his writings, his teachings, through his poetry, through listening to his talks, particularly his voice carries something of power, I think, but also through people who knew him, order members who knew him, and in your own imaginal world. He, Bhante, had great reverence for his teachers. As you know, probably, he had what he considered 8 main teachers. And I'm told that somebody once asked him when he came to England, they were all in India, whether he missed his teachers or not. And he said he didn't, because he never felt parted from them. He never felt separate from them. And I'm not going to read you what he writes about his teachers. Well, he's written a whole book called Precious Teachers. But he talks about how he naturally felt reverence for his teachers, and he knew they were human, but he knew that they were more spiritually developed than he was, and that was enough for him to revere them for the whole of his life. And interestingly, I'm told that his teachers thought highly of him. Some of his teachers, some of his Tibetan teachers, were the most renowned Tibetan teachers of the 20th century. And I'm told that they thought highly of him. Diane Andy is writing a book about his teachers, and I hope that she's also going to talk about what they thought about him. But just a couple of things, like one of his teachers who gave him his first tantric initiation into the Green Tara Sadhana was called Chatrul Rinpoche. I recently visited his monastery in Nepal. Chatrul Rinpoche was an unconventional Tibetan Lama, even for Tibetan Lamas. And he used to refer, apparently, to Bhante. He lived, he was the last of Bhante's teachers to die. I unfortunately didn't meet him. But he used to refer to Bhante as Kabje. And Kabje is an honorific term in Tibetan, meaning His Holiness. So one of Bhante's teachers used to refer to him as Kabje. And Paramatta, who was a great friend, a very, very close friend of Bhante's, a disciple and a friend, tells the story of going to meet Chatrul Rinpoche in Kalimpong, in northeast India near Sikkim. And Chatrul Rinpoche was sort of notorious for not staying in one place, even well into his old age, and he lived to a very ripe old age. He would just take off and go wandering. So you didn't know where you would find him. So Paramatta went to Kalimpong, not knowing whether he would find Chatrul Rinpoche. And apparently there's this sort of steep mountain road up to Kalimpong. And as Paramatta's taxi was driving up, he saw another taxi passing the other way. He looked into the window and it was Chatrul Rinpoche going the other way. So he thought he'd missed his chance. But Chatrul Rinpoche was just going to the dentist and came back. And Paramatta was able to meet him. And he was waiting in the sort of, I don't know what the reception area was for the, Chatrul Rinpoche was up in his room upstairs. You had to wait downstairs. And Paramatta says there was this other man, this young American man who wanted to meet him, who'd come a great distance, who went up the stairs first. And just a few minutes later came back down, quite disappointed looking, as if he'd been sort of quickly dismissed. So Paramatta was like, I don't know whether Chatrul Rinpoche will meet me. But he did meet Paramatta, and Paramatta says that when he went up to the room, there wasn't very much in the room. Chatrul Rinpoche was sitting on a chair, and opposite him was a photo of Bhante. So that's just that's just a lovely kind of anecdote of how Chatrul Rinpoche regarded Bhante. Today I was watching a video of one other of Bhante's teachers called Dada Rinpoche, who was not just a teacher but a friend of Bhante's. And Dada Rinpoche said that he had never before Bhante nor since Bhante had a disciple like Bhante. That Bhante's motivation and dedication to studying the Dharma was so strong that it inspired Dada Rinpoche to study more deeply. Yeah? They would meet, he said, every day. They would talk, sometimes through a translator, sometimes in sort of broken Hindi, and sometimes Dada Rinpoche seemed to say that however profound the topic that they were talking about, Bhante would immediately get it, not just understand it, but then put it into practice and then be able to communicate it to others. And Dada Rinpoche regarded all of Bhante's disciples as his disciples. He said that he was never going to be able to come to the West, so he was so glad that Bhante did, and he was so glad to call all of Bhante's disciples his disciples. What an honour, what a great compliment Dada Rinpoche paid to Bhante to regard us as his disciples. So Bhante gave us, of course, the gift of the Dharma, and as Ketu Raja said, we wouldn't be here without that gift. But he's an extraordinary teacher, I think, amongst Dharma teachers. There are many people in the West now who are spreading the Dharma, and I'm glad of that. It would be a tragic shame if Triratna was the only game in town. But I don't think any Buddhist teacher in modern times has seen the whole of Buddhism as a unified tradition and then managed to find the underlying principles that bring the whole of the Buddhist tradition, all 2,500 years of that tradition, that has spread to so many different cultures and looks so diverse as to be hard to believe that it's the same religion at all. Bhante has seen the underlying principles that unite that whole tradition and then has found a way of communicating those practices and principles in a synthesized way that opens up that whole Dharma world to us. Yeah? I don't know of any other teacher who has managed to do that in modern times. I think in times gone by, centuries gone by, you had some great Chinese masters who did the same for all the Dharma that was available to them. Systematizers. To do that requires, I think, an extraordinarily penetrative insight into the transcendental nature of the Dharma. It's only, I think, through transcendental insight, beyond all words, beyond all concepts, that then you can make sense of how all these different concepts and teachings and practices cohere. where they fit. It's almost like, I think Bhante stepped outside of Buddhism and saw the whole thing as one gleaming jewel. Not only that, he's then managed to create a Sangha. And not all Buddhist teachers have done that. You know, many Buddhist teachers these days are teaching online, and you don't get a Sangha online. You might get a following, but it's not what we've got. It's not a community of friends that's international, that's beyond. It's an equal ordination that we have for men and for women, regardless of monk or lay, regardless of lifestyle, you could say, regardless of race and culture, of sexual orientation. It's one equal ordination. That, I don't think, has happened elsewhere in the Buddhist world, at least to my knowledge. It's extraordinary, that very gift. But it's very easy to take that for granted because, well, all I've known in the Buddhist world, actually it's not quite true. I have been, when I was younger, to a Zen group, but pretty much all I've known is Triratna. It's only when I go to Bodh Gaya, I was recently in Bodh Gaya, and it's only when I'm there in the midst of, you could say, the whole of the Buddhist world gathering together at the foot of the Bodhi tree, at the feet of the place of enlightenment, that you can see how much we have in common and how distinctive we are as a Sangha. When I was there in January and February, there was no other Sangha there that had different races in. Like, we had about 800 order members, about 400, maybe 700 order members, 400 from India, Indian ones, and then 300 or so from all over the rest of the world, men and women practicing together across languages. We couldn't always even communicate with each other in words. No other Sangha had that in Bodh Gaya. They tended to be one particular cultural group or racial group. More than that, and I could just give a talk on that, but more than that, so he's given us a Sangha, but he's given us this lineage of institutions, which doesn't sound very inspiring, but this is an institution. He's given us institutions like centres and retreat centres and communities and businesses and a whole system of training, so that if somebody wants to be ordained, they can undergo that training, a thorough grounding in the Mitra study course. These are institutions, and of course it's not just Bhante that's given us those. They've evolved in a way. They've been co-created by the whole of the Sangha, but Bhante has been the architect behind the principles, behind those institutions. And without those, it's like the Dharma doesn't, I think it just exists in a more abstract way, in books, in words, in people, of course, but people need to be able to come together. So he's given us, I think, a world, a Dharma world. He talked in terms of a nucleus of a new society. It was like he saw as a nucleus of a society that could grow and grow and grow. Bhante was interested, I think, in elevating human consciousness, in using the Dharma to elevate human consciousness. And that is perhaps the most profound vision that any of us can have. I want to go back to one or two of my recollections of meeting Bhante. He used to come to dinner in our community. I live in a community above the London Buddhist Centre. And most of the time I was too shy to say anything. But he would gently kind of tease us all and try and get us to talk. After I was ordained, I was a bit bolder somehow. And I can remember there was an order convention in a school that we still use in Wyndham in Norfolk. And myself and all the men that I'd been ordained with were invited to have lunch with Bhante. And so we all met in this kind of large room. And Bhante was sitting at one end, and I found myself sitting right at the other end of this long table with these glass doors behind me, and the sun streaming through on this bright summer's day, having lunch. Bhante had recently lost his eyesight. He'd gone blind. The last, I don't know how many years of his life, he couldn't see. But it had happened recently. And so I thought it was only polite to acknowledge that he'd lost his sight. And so I said to him across this long table, when we started talking, I said I was sorry that I think I said I was sorry, I hope I said I was sorry, that he'd lost his sight. And I wondered how much he could see, because I knew he could see some things. And he looked straight at me, with that sort of elephant look that the Buddha is said to have had. He looked straight at me and said, "I can see your ears." And the light was coming in through, so I can just imagine my ears were lit up in this kind of sunlight. And suddenly, I giggled and laughed, and then everybody laughed, and then it was like the ice was broken. It was so lovely. It was so lovely. He could be challenging, though. I've told this story before, so forgive me if you've heard it. But I once went to see him, and I asked him, rather sillily, really, I said, "Bhante, what do you think is the main difference between Hinduism and Buddhism?" And it's such a silly question because it's sort of huge. Do you see what I mean? And I know Bhante has himself said, Bhante was so widely read in so many spheres, not science, but even science he knew a little bit. He once said he knew more about Hinduism than he did about Buddhism. So that's quite a statement, isn't it? He didn't say that to me, but to me he just said, "What do you mean by Hinduism, Jnanavaca? Do you mean its popular practices? Do you mean the Vedas? Do you mean the Upanishads? Do you mean the different teachers in different schools? There are many schools of Hinduism, Jnanavaca. Which one do you mean?" I was like, "Oh dear, I don't know." Vedanta, Bhante, what's the main difference between Vedanta and Buddhism, Bhante? Feeling myself sort of digging into a hole. And he said, there are 5 different types of Vedanta in Hinduism, Jnanavaca. And then he told me they're each of the 5 schools, what they were called, who their founding gurus were, and what their basic metaphysical position was. Yeah? And he said, "So which type of Vedanta did you have in mind?" And he was sort of both teasing me and challenging me to sharpen up. What am I doing asking such sloppy questions? I've got a mind. Use it, is kind of what he was saying. Anyway, I just said, "Oh, I don't know, Bhante, I was just making conversation." I did actually have a real question, but I was by that stage, too timid and baffled and confused to even know what my question was. Wonderful. I'm so glad to have been teased by Bhante. They're some of my fondest memories of him. At times I did feel I was in the presence of something a bit uncanny. I know not everybody felt that with Bhante, because often you'd meet Bhante and it was very ordinary. He'd talked about what you were interested in, what he was interested in. We wouldn't always talk about the Dharma. It was very, very ordinary. But, you know, I can remember one time going to see him at Ashtana. He'd asked to see me. I was on a meeting there, a chairman's meeting, a chair's meeting. And he had some concern about the meeting that he wanted to discuss with me. So we were talking, as it were, quite prosaic business things about the agenda of the meeting. And I was only in there for about 20 minutes, 15 minutes. I remember that meeting because I'd gone in with no expectations of a dharmic conversation. Do you see what I mean? I knew what he wanted to talk about. And it was fine. It was fine. Our conversation was very, in a way, it was stimulating and interesting. But what I hadn't anticipated was that as I left the room, my mind was in a different state. In fact, even while I was sitting there, I was aware of my mind being uplifted, as if I was in meditation, and I definitely wasn't in meditation. And it felt like a sort of bright whiteness in my mind, a bright white, not very bright, but a white clarity of light. And I knew it wasn't me, if you see what I mean. It was something that it was Bhante's mind that I maybe had glimpsed a little of. At least that was my... You see, I'm now talking about things that are my imaginal... They're part of my mythic inner world. So you could say maybe I imagined it, and it doesn't really matter. For me, these meetings and these experiences are profoundly important. My last meeting with him, and again I've talked about this many times, was just before he died. And he died in October, at the end of October 2018. In 2018, I stepped down as chair of the London Buddhist Centre, and I was going to go on a 6-month solitary retreat. And I wanted to go and see Bhante before I went on this retreat. And I was late because the trains were cancelled from London. Bhante was ill, and I didn't know whether I was going to be able to see him at all. He wasn't seeing people very much. You had to sort of see on the day whether he had the energy to meet you or not. I phoned ahead and said, sorry, I'm not going to be able to make it for the time. And his secretary phoned back and said, Bhante will still see you. So I went in, I rushed in. I was a bit flustered. I didn't even have time to take my shoes off. I wanted to prostrate, but then it didn't feel right with my shoes on. And I was a bit all over the place. He sort of just was very composed, of course, and asked me what I was reading, or had I been to see anything interesting. And I'd been to see, just a few days before, a play about Mary Queen of Scots and her meeting, which never really happened, with Elizabeth I. And I mentioned the play, and he knew of the play. He said, did I know that it was based on Walter Scott and so forth? He knew more about the play than I did, having just seen it. And he said, you do know that meeting never took place, and that it's fiction that they ever met, Mary and Elizabeth. And I said, yes. And then we talked about how many husbands Mary had. And I couldn't remember, and he could name them. And I found myself both sort of engaged and thinking, what am I doing? Talking about Mary Queen of Scots, of whom I know nothing, at this crucial kind of meeting. But we carried on for a little while. And then he said, well, then I said, I'm going to go on solitary retreat, Bhante, for 6 months. Do you have any advice? And it's such a stupid question again. I've been ordained for over 2 decades or more. And he said, well, I expect you'll be meditating. Huh? And again, you could see this kind of glint in his, and studying. Huh? And I just thought, oh, Jnanavaca, you know, clucks. It was all going from, you know, bad to worse, my meeting. And I said, yes, Bhante, I'll do all of those things, I'm sure. And then he said, maybe we should leave it there, Jnanavaca. Nice to see you, very nice to see you. And I said it was very lovely to see him. But then I said, Bhante, I'd come here to ask for your blessings. And the atmosphere in the room changed. That was my experience. It was like I suddenly had his full attention in a much deeper sense. Not that I didn't have it before, but now I had something, I don't know, his full mind. And it was a bit of a shock, because it felt like, I mean, it didn't literally happen like this, but it felt like the lights in the room dimmed. It was that sort of intensity. If you were, you know, watching a film, it was like that. The lights dimmed, and suddenly there was this kind of, you know, just meeting, real meeting. And he said, very deliberately and slowly, he said, well, you have definitely got my blessings, Jnanavaca. You have had them in the past, and you will have them in the future. Which were pretty much the last words that Bhante said to me. I then got up, I bowed, I was about to leave. My sister Bodhivandana, who's sitting over there, had sent some Indian sweets with me to give to Bhante. And so I'd given these sweets to Bhante. And I think as I was walking out of the door, his last words were, remember to thank your sister for the sweets. And I never saw him again. I then went on this solitary retreat. I was there for his 93rd birthday. I can remember offering to my shrine, I offered, I was in this almond grove in Dukkaloka, and I picked 3 almonds from a tree in their shells. And that's all I could offer. And I wrote some lines of verse, and I offered these 3 almonds as a symbol of the 3 jewels that he'd given to me. And I wrote some verses for that. And I thought that, well, when I come off the retreat, I will offer them to Bhante, these 3 almonds from my solitary retreat from Dukkaloka. Dukkaloka was a very special place in Bhante's heart. I got back from my solitary retreat, and Bhante was still alive, and he died the very next day. So the next time I saw him, as it were, was at his funeral, and I offered those almonds to his to his grave, really, to his burial mound, and I recited the poem in a dream. He appeared to me in a dream, and I wanted to. I mean, I don't know if I would have dared share these lines with Bhante, but I did in the dream. So he received my offering. I want to tell one more memory. No, it's not a memory of Bhante, really. It's another story. And then I want to finish with some more words from Bhante. I hope I've given an indication that behind the appearance of the man, I think maybe even behind the persona that he adopted in his later years of this English gentleman, there was something untamed and unknowable, something wild, something extraordinary, a transcendental reality that I think flowed through this human being who had had an extraordinary life but nevertheless was a human being, I think was also a vehicle for the Dharma. And I mean the Dharma with a capital D, as in the transcendental principle of reality flowed through him into creating this order and movement that we're now part of. I believe that. This last story is, for me, an image of who Bhante really, or a hint of something of who Bhante really was, at least for me. So I was again at Recollections in 2022, 3 years ago, co-leading the ordination course where men were, about 16 men were getting ordained. And, it's a 3-month course and we were maybe halfway through. So we'd done a lot of practice together. And in the shrine room, we were just sitting, doing, if you can do just sitting. I was just sitting. I was quite absorbed. And suddenly, Padmasambhava appeared. And I've never had this experience of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva figure appearing like this. I don't have a very visual sense, and normally I can feel presences, but I don't see them. Where suddenly he appeared, and it wasn't me. I wasn't even thinking of him, let alone trying to imagine him or invoke him. He appeared. It was definitely him, and it was uncanny in that he was aware of me, and I knew that he was aware of me. It wasn't just like, I don't know if you've had that experience. It was like looking at somebody and they're looking at you. And it's Padmasambhava's eyes that were looking at me. So they were unblinking, looking directly at me. And it was definitely him in that sort of, anyway, it was him. And I don't meditate. I'd never really meditated formally on Padmasambhava. I have a few times, but he's not my yidam. But he was a figure that Bhante was very closely associated with. Anyway, I said in my heart, in my mind, great Guru, please give me a teaching, which is, I thought, an appropriate, if Padmasambhava appears, you could do worse than ask for a teaching. And he didn't. He just sat there, still. The vision didn't fade, and I'm not prone to visions. It didn't fade. But there was no words, no teaching, no anything. He was just looking at me, sort of in a rather stern but interested way. So I repeated that in my heart, in my mind. I said, great Guru, please give me a teaching. And there was nothing. Now, if you say something to the Buddha, the tradition was if you asked 3 times, the Buddha would always answer, whether you wanted the answer or not, whether you liked the answer or not, he would always answer if you asked 3 times. So I'm slightly trepidatious now. Do I really want a teaching from Padmasambhava? I'm not sure I do, because you could imagine him saying, stop watching Netflix or something, or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, I did, and I'm glad I did, because the 3rd time I asked, there was an immediate response, and it was as if the words were, it's not that I heard them so much as they were in my mind, but they weren't my words. There's a word for that. There's a word for that, and I don't know what it is, where a thought isn't your thought, but appears very strongly in your mind. And there were just 4 words. So I said for the 3rd time, great Guru, please give me a teaching. And the 4 words from Padmasambhava were, I gave you Bhante. Which shook me out of my meditation. It was like I was so shocked. They weren't what I expected. I gave you Bhante. This is Padmasambhava saying, he gave, and I take the you to mean us. Bhante. I think that is how I, in my meditations, think of Bhante. I think of him as somehow associated with Padmasambhava, like a great terton, an emanation of Padmasambhava. Now, I'm not saying that that is everybody's experience, nor does it have to be. I'm trying to share something of my response to Bhante. And I think what I do want to say, though, is that if you imaginatively connect with Bhante, he will connect with you in whatever way you do that. And he doesn't have to be alive to do that. He will do that. I don't know who Bhante was. You can read the memoirs, and you can read them at different levels, as that first paragraph that I read, a few paragraphs, seem to imply. Those spokes of light feel, I don't know, they sort of evoke for me the wheel of life, turning one way and then turning the other way, and sometimes turning both ways, and then going to sleep every night engulfed in golden light until the age of 5 or 6. And then when you read his memoirs, he was born to teach the Dharma. The life, so much happened that so many coincidences that led him to the Dharma and led him to teach the Dharma. It's hard not to believe that it was planned like that. And bodhisattvas are said to be able to do that. They choose to come back, as it were, they choose to come to any realm, and in order to teach the Dharma. And I think Bhante was a bodhisattva in grey. I want to finish with a poem of Bhante's, which he wrote in 1947, so he's 22. 1947 was the year that he went forth. He burnt his passport. He's living in India. He isn't yet ordained, and he's gone forth. And in this, it's called The Clouded Dragon, and I know some of you will know it. In this, he talks about an image for great sages. And the image that he uses is of a dragon. And he, I'm sure, wasn't talking about himself when he wrote this at the age of 22, maybe even 21. But for me, he became that great sage who was a dragon. Does that make sense? The clouded dragon. Behold the clouded dragon, imperial, gold, benign, clad in thunder, eyed with lightning, rushing madly, scales ashine, down to earth and up to heaven, with energy divine, soaring, plunging, rolling, twisting, with force all furious fine. Behold the clouded dragon, as he breasteth, strong and free, the immensities of heaven and the tumult of the sea. Then draws his clouds around him, and his cloudlets quietly, as into mist and pelting rain, he melts mysteriously. Behold the clouded dragon, as a symbol, as a sign of the sage whose thoughts are thunders, whose intuitions shine like lightnings in the dark blue sky, blinding to mortal eye, while he feels the central silence in the storm of the divine. Behold the clouded dragon, this sage who smiles at thee. Follow his furious footsteps, win his tranquility, his thoughts he draws around him. For his true form, fierce and free, half hidden by his wisdom, no man may ever see. Isn't that wonderful? I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Oh, well, gosh, thank you very much, Jnanavaca. That was so rich and delightful, and a great gift on Bhante's birthday, celebrating his birthday. I've got a small gift, actually.
Oh.
This is a book. Actually, it is in the bookshop as well. But this is 100 order members were asked what was your favourite poem or piece from Bhante's writing. And there's the actual quote, and then there's also a little bit about why that was important to them. And I think that actually fits in with your talk.
That's very lovely.
In a certain kind of sense, I think we've seen Bhante, or another facet of Bhante, through your relationship, through you sharing your relationship with Bhante. It's almost like something, you see a bit more Bhante through each of his, particularly his close disciples. So I feel very, very privileged to have seen a little bit more Bhante, another aspect, and very freshly so. Well,
thank you very much.
And this gift
Thank
to
you very much. That's very
and
kind.
just another round of applause. Yeah.